It's a pleasure to see you and to talk about this film and the formidable woman that Clementine Churchill was. So what did you know? What did you discover? What was the experience of being her?
Well, the experience was brilliant. I'm sure my little foray into her world was such a short time. You know, I had very little time to play her. I was bereft when I had to leave her at the last day of shooting. I thought, I know so much more about this character, and there's no room to put it in the film. But no, I mean, the first time I ever saw Clementine Churchill, or I'm aware of it, was when I was watching the funeral as a very small child on the television and seeing this woman step out of the limousine and walk up the steps of the church, this incredibly elegant old lady. And so the first thing I had about her was her elegance. And then I discovered reading, and I was interested in the role because I was interested in what it means to be a wife of a man who has so much power and is in such so much responsibility. When he says in the film, you know, and I take full responsibility for the 300,000 men. I mean, you know, it seems, is, yeah. I mean, yes, but and Halifax says, oh, really? Like what? It's just one man's, you know. Anyway, so that was. It was very interesting to me that how a woman deals with that, the domestic side, the emotional side, how do you support, how do you love, how do you encourage, how do you stand by a man who is going through all of that. I was interested in that. And then I discovered Clementine by reading a lot, etc., and discovered somebody who'd had a very, very complicated life. Her mother was a divorcee, which in the 1900s was not a good place to be, who moved her 3 children to Dieppe in northern France, where she brought them up by winning money at the gambling tables in the casinos. So Clementine was brought up with a sort of in an anxious environment, never really knowing where the money was going to come from next, and having to move house all of the time. And so she absolutely hated gambling, terrified of being poor. When she first went to London, she used to make her own clothes, which was frowned upon, and people used to make jokes behind her back about the way she was dressed. She was taken out of school by her father, even though her teachers all wanted her to carry on to further education, but her father considered that the woman didn't need an education, so you know, she was taken out of school. And you must, and I understand from my reading and from the relationships that she was able to build, she must have been fantastically clever to be able to keep up and to be entertaining to be married to Winston Churchill. You'd have to be able to be interesting to him. So she must have been able to give as good as she got. And to understand and to follow and to know what they're talking about. So she must have had some steep learning curves.
And she was a great support system. I mean, one of the themes of the film is that was a true love story. And I suppose it was true in real life, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think they had a very stormy relationship. I think they had moments which were very difficult. They both suffered from depression. Winston's black dog is well documented, but most people don't know about Clementine, who was actually given electroshock treatment later in life. She was incredibly shy. You can see in the footage, there's very little footage available to watch, and I wanted to see what she looked like, of course. I looked at that quite a lot. You could see somebody so nervous about talking in public. It's really kind of jittery and jumpy and tense like this. But yet did it because she felt she had to do something. She was so energetic. She was always on the go. You know, she wasn't lolling around in the background. She was out there, helping people, getting together, you know, making sure the Red Cross was invigorated and working for refugees and working for mothers of wives of soldiers she created a nursing home for the wives of soldiers so they could go and have their baby, a maternity ward. She was very, very active during the war, and I think that's why after the war, when I was a little girl growing up in the 1960s, people still, referred to her as being a fantastic woman.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it is, and I'm sure there's a whole film there.
Yeah,
from
no,
what I'm hearing from you, there's a whole
could
movie.
be. No, yeah, definitely, yeah.
I didn't grow up in England, obviously, and but I studied French history books, and it was all about Churchill in his glorious side. So I think it's quite interesting to dive into his emotional life.
To dive into his emotional life and see how difficult it is to make these decisions, and that human beings have flaws, and human beings make mistakes
and doubts.
And doubts. But at some point, we have to trust that good will come of it. I think it's a very interesting. I mean, it's a fascinating story, this Darkest Hour.
I agree.
And something we don't. I was not aware of how close we were to disaster. How Europe would have been a completely different place had Winston Churchill not stepped up to the plate and come up with this zany idea how to get these boys off the beach, and then how to progress in the war, how to protect his country.
Yes, all those circumstances coming together.
And for your first week on the job, difficult.
With nobody supporting you.
With no one supporting you,
I think that was like the most fascinating aspect, being a seul contre tous kind of situation.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Gary and him disappearing completely in this performance. And I think obviously physically, but all of him, like his voice, everything became Churchill.
Yeah, it was very, very impressive. And because of his commitment and dedication to transform, it made it easy for us to all jump into our roles, because it's quite difficult. There's a sort of moral engagement when you take on a character that has actually existed and been a living, breathing person, who has family, who has friends, who has, you have to get it right. And it's quite handy. It's a bit of a handicap, that, because you can't just invent, you can't just make it up, and own these characters, because that's what we do normally. We own these characters. I know more about this character than anyone else. Yeah. But in these cases, when you're playing somebody who's actually existed, you know tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. So you have to kind of take on board everything that you've learned through research or connection with the other actor, and let it go at some point. And working with Gary, that was made a lot easier by his utterly convincing portrayal of this man, and how every day he had hours of makeup just to get it on, and then hours of makeup to take it off. Never once complained, always completely level-tempered, paced himself beautifully, managed to, and that's just the human being aspect, but the performance, and that's the beauty of this makeup, is that it allows the face to come through, the face that it's based on, the expressions are all there, and as an actor acting with somebody who is wearing so much latex on their face, sometimes it's a little, you're not quite sure which bit is real and which bit isn't. And in this case, and I mean, talking about emotion, which bits are did I read that properly? Is that a real look? Because sometimes it's deformed by the makeup. But in this case, it was just so beautifully done. It allowed the soul to come through. It was very beautiful.
Absolutely. And this whole film was an experience, more than a role for everybody. It was kind of an experience.
I think it was. Yeah. I think it was, because we were all so deeply invested in our characters. You talk to Lily, and she'll tell you the same thing. You have to just jump in.